Hello and welcome again into this module, and in this module we will discuss about the foundational requirements. It might be a bit surprised that this term we haven't used earlier, but this is pretty common term what we use in industrial systems and when we deal with the cybersecurity. So basically this term is coming from this IEC 62443. So what is IEC 62443? It is a worldwide de facto standard for security of ICS, and this standard was created by International Society of Automation, and which is also called ISA. Sometimes it is called ISA 99 also. That was the former name of this standard and was taken over by International Electrotechnical Commission, and then we say IEC 62443, who is responsible for further developing it. So basically IEC 62443 assists in the evaluation of existing and potential vulnerabilities within ICS and aids in applying the necessary mitigations. So if we see, the goal of this standard is to reduce the risk of threats and failures within ICS networks. The standard consists of 13 documents. If you want to see what more in details, so it consists 13 documents which are grouped into four groups, that is general, policies, procedures, system and concepts. So we are not going to discuss that in detail. If you are interested, you can see it on YouTube or somewhere else, or I will post another videos on this. But we'll take some of the important things what we can study here. So we'll today study about the foundational requirements. So these are the foundational requirements as per the standard 62443.3 and 4.2. So basically the foundational requirements helps us to design our cybersecurity technical control. So there are 7 foundational requirements. First is identification and authentication control. So we need to implement cybersecurity solutions for identification and authentication. We will discuss about all of these in little bit details in upcoming chapters. So let's go one by one for now. So another is use control. So we will study about the auditings and log controls, what type of use control we can implement. Then about the system integrity, how we can maintain the system integrity. First we will understand what is system integrity. Then data confidentiality, what we can do about the data confidentiality. Restricted data flow, so what other solutions we can put, whether firewall is required, whether segmentation is required. Then timely response to events is also a foundational requirement, like if some event happened and then are we going to do anything. So those steps and those things what we can do, that comes under timely response to events. And finally is the resource availability. So it means like if something happens in our environment, then how we are ensuring the resource availability in our environment. So basically in upcoming chapters we will discuss about these 7 foundational requirements as per IEC 62443, and this will give you a good insight. So let's go to the first one, which is identification and authentication. So as the name states, that this terms is something to do with the identification of a user to some system, against some system, and authentication of user against the identification what he provided or she provided. Or even if it is a software that needs to be identified for accessing some process, or need to authenticate if already the software has username, then with something what they have. So basically the official definition of access control is reliably identify and authenticate all users. Users could be humans, softwares, processes and devices attempting to access the ICS. So prior to moving ahead, we need to understand basically what is identification, what is authentication, authorization or access. So authentication is the initial process of establishing the identity of a user. You need to authenticate yourself. So how would you authenticate yourself that I am the authentic user? So there will be a username associated with that, or there will be some identity revealing. So like we have our own identity. My name is my identity, or my some number, government issues some number, that is my identity. Or if a device has IP address and host name, so that host name is their identity. So that is one thing. And authentication is the initial process of establishing the identity of a user. Then we have authorization. So what is the authorization? Authorization adds an extra layer of security to the authentication process. So it specifies access rights and privileges to resource to determine whether the user should be granted access to data to make a specific transaction. So if some user wants to do something in the network or do something on the device, then he need to be get authorized for that activity, whether the required privileges are available for that user or not. So that comes under the authorization. So authorization, we'll see what are the examples of authorization. We'll study about those things as well. And then we have access. So once a user has completed the authentication and the authorization steps, their identity will be verified. This grants them access to the resource they are attempting to log in. So we'll discuss about these access controls later. We have a detailed slide for that. So let's move and see about understand like let us clear our concepts about the differences in between identification, authentication, and authorization, because these three are three different things. So let us suppose if there is a user, he has some user ID or username or physical access control, so that is his identification. Even for the physical control, if he has some card, so that is his identification. Then ambient access points information password. So if he enters the password, so that is the authentication happening in the backend. And then granting or denying or determining the resources. So if any of these three things is done by the system, it authorizes to access the resources. So basically identification describes a method of ensuring that the subject is an entity it claims to be. So a username or account number or his identity card, that is the mode of identification. Then we have authentication. So authentication can be categorized into multiple groups. They are also called authentication methods as well. It could be something you know, something you have, and something you are, and something you do. So these four things we can add in this. So it is a method of proving the subject's identity. It could be a password, passphrase, PIN. So something you know, that is the password or passphrase. Something you have. Let us suppose you have a access card and it has the password. Also, it has the PKI certificates. Then that is letting you enter inside a premises. So that, or you got an OTP from the website. So that is also something you have. And something you are. So let us suppose you have to enter somewhere and you have to use your fingerprint or your retina scan. So that could be the something you are, that cannot be changed. And something you do, like some signature pattern. In mobile also we need to make some patterns, we need to do some signature, we need to do dynamic keystrokes. So that is the you do. So authentication can be done by these four types of methods. So these are authentication methods. Now I think now identification and authentication is clear. So now let's understand what is authorization. So authorization is a method of controlling the access of objects by the subject. So a user cannot delete a particular file after logging into system. So let us suppose you are identified, you are authenticated. Now what privileges you have? Can you delete a file? No. Yes. So that is a privilege. Or we can say that authorization determines the access level of the subject to the object. In other words, authorization determines that the privileges of the user or subject, how it can interact with the object or the system or the resources. So let us suppose here classification of documents or the system comes into role. So whether it is a secret, top secret, restricted, classified, unclassified, confidential, internal. So those tags you have seen on some of the documents or some of the systems: supercritical, critical, monitoring, operator, guest. So all these things are the authorization. So to sum up, what identification, authentication, and authorization is: identification occurs when a user claims an identity, and authentication occurs when a user provides a credential. So once a user is authorized, access level, privilege of the resource is managed through authorization mechanism. So basically now I think we have clarified it enough. Now let's go back to this part. So what are these? These are the types of access control. So first is the attribute based access control. So ABAC is a dynamic context based policy that defines the access based on policy granted to user. So if some attribute of some system is there, so that will defined in the policy and access will be granted to the user. Then we have role based access control, and this is pretty common in ICS. Others are not much common, but rule based access control and role based access control are pretty common. So RBAC creates permission based on the group of users. So let us suppose if I define that these all are engineers, there are A, B, C, D users are, these all are engineers, and their roles we can identify. They can modify the logic, they can create the logic, they can download program, they can upload the program to PLC. So those will be the roles that user hold, and actions that users takes also. So users are able to perform any action enabled to their role and cannot change the access control level they are assigned. So this type of role-based access control you have seen in DCS, like there is an operator group, there is a maintenance group, there is a network admin group. So multiple type of user groups are there, and their specific and respective privileges are assigned to it. So that is called role-based access control. Now mandatory access control is a place where strict policy on individual users are and data resources and system they want to access. The policies are managed by organization administrator. Users are not able to alter, revoke or set permission. So these are some mandatory access control, where let us suppose you want to shut down a server. So for that there will be only specific user can do that thing by accessing the control room. They will have the card, they will have the permits, the opening the cabinet only, those two people will be required to open the cabinet. So those type of access is called mandatory access control, and it will have a very strict policy. Now next is discretionary access control. So DAC model allows the data owner to decide access control by designing or by assigning access rights to rules that user specify. So when a user is granted access to a system, they can then provide access to other users as they see fit. So this depends on, we can include this type of DAC into a permit system. So when we go for a permit and the user allows us, yes, you can work on this system, you can take, shut down this system. So at that time, if they give you some username and password, that will come under the discretionary access control. Then we have break glass access control. So break glass, as the name says, it is the emergency. So in case of critical emergency, user is given immediate access to the system. So that is called break glass access control. And rule based, as the name says, rule based approach sees a system admin define rules that govern access to corporate resources. So these rules are typically built around conditions such as location or time of day of that user. So if I give permission to the vendor that you can log in between 2:15, 2:30 p.m. from this IP address, then only you will get access. So that type of rule we can create. And then finally we have physical access control to grant access to physical building and physical devices. So this is all about the identity and authentication. Hope I clarified all these points, and differentiation is the major thing. So let's move to the next topic. Thank you.